who's always been interested in how we can do healthcare in a different, future-proof and transformative way. It wasn't just about the delivery of healthcare that I was passionate about. It was about how we can think about these things at a system level, both nationally and internationally, and how we can adapt that sector to something that's a bit more future-facing. There is a lot to be said around giving people a menu of options and letting them diffuse towards the ones that align the strongest with their pet passions. Because a lot of these things actually, it's not about delivering an outcome, it's about learning through a process. But to your point around digital health, I would say actually there is a huge role for making sure that at a core level, everyone has the skills they need to be able to deliver what is increasingly a modality that patients expect and patients are demanding. Do we need everyone to have the skills to actually drive and be at the forefront of digital innovation? Maybe not, but I definitely think there is a role for that foundation being across the board. And that's one of the things I'm very passionate about and have been very passionate about for the last 5-6 years.
Hey everyone, you're listening to one of our special episodes, a mini-series hosted by Dr. Keith Grimes called How to Get Into Healthtech, where, you guessed it, Keith speaks to an incredible mix of guests who have each taken a different path into the space so you can learn how they did it and what they do now. This is all part of our mission to make careers in health tech far more accessible, so whatever your background, I hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with our usual episodes soon, and here is another superb conversation in that series.
Hello everyone, and welcome to How to Get Into Healthtech. My name is Dr. Keith Grimes. I am a digital health doctor and founder of Curistica, and I am in a wonderful job and I really enjoy myself. And I think the reason for that is because I'd always wanted to get into health tech, even though I didn't know exactly what that was. And I think I'm not alone in this. I get asked a lot about it, and I've talked about it a lot. But in a world where we don't have clarity on exactly how you get into this space, there's no real formal routes in. What better way to find out more is at least compare each other's stories. So James at SomX was kind enough to give me the opportunity to speak to folk and maybe find out a little bit and share some ideas. So today I am really pleased to have Dr. Arrash Yassaee speaking with me. I won't do that eggy bit where I introduce him on that. I think it's always best for people to talk about themselves. And if he forgets anything that he should be talking about, I'll call him out on it and bring it up too. But Arrash, how are you today?
Really well, Keith. It's really great to see you again. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, fantastic. So, well, look, it is lovely to have you. And I obviously know a bit about your background, but we're here to learn about you today. So maybe I'll just hand over and we'll just start before we turn the time machine on and go back to your earlier days. You want to just say a little bit about who you are and what you're doing right now?
Sure thing. So, as you mentioned, I'm Arrash. I'm a pediatrician, clinical and academic. And I'm someone who's always been interested in how we can do healthcare in a different, future-proof and transformative way. I had the opportunity over a number of years to take on various roles, various exciting opportunities. And right now I'm working in NHS England, where I oversee our MedTech Innovation programs and policy.
Yeah, the dream position. Well, that's great, but you're there now, but you didn't start there, and we got a wee hint of where some of your sort of early passions came from. But what's nice, I think, is to kind of go back and sort of go back to what you wanted to be when you grew up. You know, as a kid, what were you thinking back in the day? And you can go back as far as you'd like, but what was in young Arrash's mind?
I think like every kid, I went through the usual carousel of every dream job, from sort of firefighter, pilots, astronauts. Medicine, I have to say, was always on the cards for quite a long time and quite early on. The only other area I really considered and nearly went into, especially towards the end of school, was maths. I was always fascinated by maths, and I think it was the ability to look at a problem, to really interrogate it, and to come up with a beautiful solution to that problem. But medicine's always been something that I've been interested in. And even from my early days in medical school, it was something that I realized it wasn't just about the delivery of healthcare that I was passionate about. It was about how we can think about these things at a system level, both nationally and internationally, and how we can adapt that sector to something that's a bit more future facing and a bit more future proof.
This is sort of in your mind. It's interesting you say about maths. I'm quite a fan of maths as well. I think for the same reasons that you are, there's something quite lovely about the purity of breaking down that problem and potentially even the certainty of the answer as well, which is, I think, harder to find in medicine, maybe. So as you were going through medical school, like your experience of that, did you get much opportunity to look into that system, that higher level thinking at medical school, or was it very frontliney?
I think I was really lucky in that even before medical school, I had the opportunity to look at things at a much more system level and to understand that actually as an industry, it docks in with other problems, and looking at these problems at a landscape view is often the only way that we can solve them. So even in my time in secondary school, I had the opportunity to work in what is now Public Health England, but I think then was called the Health Protection Agency. And this is partly where that appeal of looking at those problems in the round really aligned with why I liked the maths side and why I was really potentially interested in looking down at maths. So I had the opportunity to look at essentially bloodborne virus infections in healthcare workers and how those were acquired, and to identify various patterns that existed across all the data that we had back then. And this was a project that I kind of took over during summer. And what essentially came out is we saw in that data analysis, and I was sort of 16, 17 at the time, so obviously getting a huge amount of support from people who actually knew what they were doing. But in that data analysis, seeing that we were noticing these peaks that always came up in August, September time. Now, at the time, I didn't really knew what that meant. I kind of was trying to make some sort of a logical determination about what's happening at the end of summer, what's unique about the end of summer. And it was only when the people I were working with explained to me, actually, this is when all the doctors rotate. This is when a lot of the clinical stuff as well more widely rotate. And that's why we're seeing this uptake. And one of the things that and this is why they then explained, well, one of the challenges we've had is that actually when you move into a new place, you have unfamiliar equipment, you have unfamiliar procedures. And that was an example of where they said, actually, if we looked at standardizing these things a little bit more and we looked at improving some of the education and some of the kind of policy interventions in this space, we can actually look to reduce those numbers. And actually seeing a piece of work that, 4, 5, 6 weeks already translate into something that potentially had an impact down the line is kind of the thing that got me hooked into this idea of actually there is a whole policy world outside of, well, within healthcare, but outside of the frontline delivery of healthcare that makes a huge impact on how these things are being conducted and how we're delivering care. And that really is the thing that got me hooked. And then I tried to do as much of that as I could through university, through student think tanks and the like. But I think that was the definitive time that permanently shifted my thinking between maths and medicine to think, actually, the bit I love about maths is the problem solving, the pattern recognition. The thing I love about medicine is the fact that you have this ability to make a real significant difference to care, an impactful difference on care. And I actually realized there's a world that those two are combined. And that's kind of what pushed me on that track ever since.
Yeah. So what an experience to have just before going in as well, that sort of chimes on the things that you're interested in and actually seeing the impact of that quite early on. Impact at scale, that kind of analytical approach to things. Yet you're a pediatrician. Now, not to say that impact at scale and analytics isn't in pediatrics, but if I didn't know that beforehand, I'd say, so I'd expect you to be in something like public health or anything like that. So you're at medical school, all these things are happening, and along the way, I'm still a pediatrician. So maybe sort of illustrate where that came from.
I think this is one of the things that I reflect on a lot when I do career mentoring and when I work in various leadership academies, that actually I can try and come up with a story retrospectively and say, this is the plan that I had all along and this is the reason why it all aligns, like you would do in a kind of job interview. I think the answer is just much more simple. It was pediatrics to me was intrinsically appealing for lots of various different reasons. It's the variety of the clinical conditions that you see. It's the fact that often for a vast number of your patients, you're able to make a quick and immediate and significant difference. And actually, I quite enjoyed the culture of the teams that I worked with when I had a chance in medical school to do those rotations. And that really kind of is what me got stuck. It's more one of those things where I liked it. It aligned nicely with the ability to do a lot of broad things, because if you wanted to do something in research or policy, actually you weren't limited to one condition, you had a whole breadth of things available. And really ever since then I've found that's been incredibly true. More recently I've moved into tech, and actually having a clinical background in a very quite generalist specialty has proven really valuable. But if I'm being totally honest, it definitely wasn't one of those things that was thought through in advance. It's probably one of those things I look back on and I try and make a nice story to give you the impression that there was a plan all along.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm guilty of that as the next person as well. You know, we always construct our stories, and we're the heroes of the stories as well. It's interesting though when you talk about it being a sort of generalist specialism as well. And I think about myself. You know, I went to general practice. Um, I suppose my question for you is that were there, if you'd had an opportunity to do, well, what was your exposure to things like public health at medical school? Because, you know, I'm just trying to think if there had been an option to do something that was maybe more closely aligned to where you are right now, do you think you might have ended up chosen that or end up here sooner? Or it's maybe difficult to ask. I don't know.
So what was my formal exposure? I guess is if that's the question you're asking, probably quite
Yeah.
limited. You had the option to do a few modules on particularly some of the kind of modeling aspects of public health, and a little bit on the policy side. But this is where I feel the opportunities that were there outside of the formal teaching and education you had in medical school, that's really what I found really helpful. And I was very fortunate to go, particularly in my undergrad, to a medical school, where I had the opportunity to spend time and socialize with people of all different disciplines, both scientific disciplines, but also like humanitarian disciplines. And that is where a lot of the extracurricular stuff that I really enjoyed doing, aside from like sports and music and drama and those sorts of things, but actually like a lot of the policy interest I now have came from the opportunity to do some of this stuff in an extracurricular context. So I had the chance to work for a few different student think tanks, one of which was very public health focused. And actually that informal stuff off the traditional curriculum menu, that's really where I got the most exposure to this. And I think it benefited me in two ways. One, that lateral thinking that you get by working with people from very different disciplines. And I think is sometimes the thought we need if we're going to think about how we transform some of these systems in quite a radical way, in the radical way they need to be transformed. But also the passion that you get by working with people who've chosen to be there. And I mean that in the complete sense. They've completely chosen to be there. It's not like they've picked a module within a course that they made a decision several years ago. They're like, every decision they've made to be at a part of a project is a very recent, contemporaneous one. And that passion becomes very evident throughout. So for me, I think the opportunity actually was more about what was around me and my surroundings, not necessarily what was there in medical school. And I think actually that was in some ways beneficial. I don't think I would have had the same enjoyment or got the same out of this if I'd been forced to do these things. I think there is a lot to be said around giving people a menu of options and letting them diffuse towards the ones that align the strongest with their pet passions. Because a lot of these things actually, it's not about delivering an outcome. It's about learning through a process. Yes, with all these kind of work that we did in the student think tank, we were there to try and deliver a policy outcome. None of it materially ended up in any notable change, but it was the skills and the knowledge and the way of working that you learn on the way that I've now retrospectively found was so incredibly useful for a lot of the work that I do now, and I've been doing for the last 5-6 years.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And actually, you've got me thinking, you know, I have a strong belief that there should be aspects of health tech or digital health taught as part of a core curriculum. But what I've heard here as well is actually the sort of counter side to that, because I'm seeing digital health taught as an optional portion in some medical schools. And you know, I get agitated about that because I think parts of it should be core. But at the same time, you've actually really nicely laid out that there's something about people choosing to enter that space, and therefore the kind of mindset that they come in with it, and the mindset of those other people that have also chosen to come into it as well, that maybe it's going to force me to rethink exactly what I say about this. But so wow, so you've got all those things that are
Can
coming
I
up,
can I
and
just come in
then
on that
yeah.
actually? Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think what you've highlighted there is there are things that we're going to need every single member of a healthcare workforce in the future to be able to do and to be able to be comfortable with and to be able to navigate. And I think that comes in two buckets. There's what do we all need practitioners individually to be able to do to be practitioners that are future proofed. There's also a second angle, which is it's really important for us all to recognize as we progress through a system, as we get more senior, there is a responsibility to, in some cases, line manage, in some cases, mentor, in some cases, to just have a more general responsibility for other people in the workforce. And there is an importance in making sure that there is a good grounding of those skills so that other people who have an interest or may have a responsibility that overlaps with some of these things have the supervision and support and structure that they need to have that success. And the analogy I would draw here is with research. We know that pretty much everyone in the workforce needs some degree of research skills to be able to appraise evidence-based medicine. Do we need everyone to have the skills to become an investigator of a big trial? No. And I think that latter bucket is best served by giving people the opportunity who choose to take that opportunity, have the passion to go and pursue that. But to your point around digital health, I would say actually there is a huge role for making sure that at a core level, everyone has the skills they need to be able to deliver what is increasingly a modality that patients expect and patients are demanding. Do we need everyone to have the skills to actually drive and be at the forefront of digital innovation? Maybe not. I can be convinced, but I'm yet to be convinced of that bit. But I definitely think there is a role for that foundation being across the board, and that's one of the things I'm very passionate about and have been very passionate about for the last 5-6 years.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to agree with you on that one as well, actually. And you were talking a little bit about there's a sort of leadership and followership skills that aren't taught, but maybe everyone has to have a certain level, but some will then choose to go into this. And it's the same with digital health, or the use of technology or AI or whatever it is that I think there are some core parts, but not everyone has to sort of push ahead and make that then the main tools that they use to practice however they want to. This last weekend, I was away at an event or a networking event, and in that I had a discussion as to whether we should start considering the use of AI as something akin to driving a car, as in only those who are certified to use these products should be doing it, which was an interesting thing. And we had a good to and fro on that. But that's for another time. So going through medical school, coming towards the point when you're heading out to the world of residency, what was happening in your life around about then? At that point, were you thinking, yeah, here we go with peds, or, where did that fit in?
My biggest reflection actually on that period is how much the landscape and the appetite and the openness for the system to allow people to do different things has changed. So I'll give you kind of one example to this. I had, in my final year of medical school, the opportunity to do two different, and I ended up doing both of them, but it was quite painful, but two different non-clinical electives. And these were electives done after finals, but before what you would now call the sort of pre-foundation preparatory phase, so the kind of traditional internship that you would do for like 5-6 weeks to get everything. So this period of time that was there for you to pursue your own interests, your own passions, and what the vast majority of people would do in this point is find a great destination, find a clinical placement there, set themselves up with quite a nice travel arrangement, and use it as an opportunity for a well-earned bit of rest and relaxation, and the chance to travel for a period of time that you're not going to be able to for some time after, not without a bit of a salary hit.
Sounds very familiar. This sounds familiar.
Yeah, no, it was. And I remember feeling during this period, I'll come to the story in a bit, but during this period, feeling a bit envious of some of the people who went down that road. But I had the opportunity to do a couple of non-clinical placements. One was at the Department of Health, where I had the opportunity to work on a number of national pieces of work that were very relevant at the time. So this was towards the end of the coalition government, start of the Conservative government. So real big change of one, urgency, but then also like impetus for a new government coming in, which is always quite an exciting time in the policy space. But then also working in a policy research unit attached to one of the London universities. And again, that was a really great chance to take research, which I'd always been interested in, had a lot of involvement in as a medical student, but look at how that might translate into the policy space, trying to get into this realm of evidence-based policy, which was really starting to emerge in certain circles around that time. Now, my big reflection from that time is how difficult it was for me to convince my medical school to let me do that for 6 weeks. And I'm very glad that I managed to make it work in the end. But when I now look at many students coming through who are quite rightly, and I think this is a fantastic place to be, doing these really exciting electives in digital, in innovation, in some cases in VC, I'm really glad to see how much that has shifted, because I think we now have a real appreciation for how valuable those skills are, but two, how incredibly important it's going to be to have a workforce that has those pockets of experience beyond what is traditionally given to you in medical school, and an appropriate recognition that after 5-6 years, depending on your course, 6 weeks is something we really can afford to carve time out. So that was kind of my biggest reflection recently about how these things have changed. So I had a chance to do those two electives, really enjoyed them, then went into my F1, F2 year. Big shift, as for many people, right? Like your first time of doing kind of shift work compared to medical school is in some ways it's great. In some ways it can be really exhausting, really draining, both the responsibility, the workload, the shift patterns. And like many people, I then spent a bit of time after my F2 year taking some time out and trying to pursue other opportunities. In my instance, that was what was then called, I think it might still be called, the National Medical Directors Clinical Fellowship Scheme, which is still run by the Faculty of Medical Leadership and Management. Something that I'd wanted to do for quite a while because I knew a lot of the people who'd gone through that program, and it's an organization I'd been involved with as a student. But it was something that I knew from the beginning I wanted to do to give myself a different set of skills, but also a bit of I would say maybe a break from what can be quite a demanding cycle of rotation after rotation after rotation, particularly in kind of F1, F2 years. So that would be my start to clinical training, and then after that, as you say, went into pediatrics.
Your sort of education and career so far, has been sort of quite mixed and eclectic and taking time and thoughtful, but trending once again back towards that sort of wanting to do things at scale to understand and affect changes, and that sort of leadership position too. And there'll be people maybe listening to this who want to do that. Certainly when I speak to folk about the route that you take to, if you want to ultimately get into a place like myself or Arrash, that sort of wandering path actually does bring up some really powerful, useful things that we'll be using every day. So you're going into pediatrics, and within that, so I'm trying to sort of put times on this as well. Actually, the Conservative government started out 2015, so where we are about 10 years ago now. So you're training as a pediatrician in that. So as you did that, you talk through your time in pediatrics. I know you're still a pediatrician, but the training.
Yeah. So, okay. Firstly, on timeframes, we're now talking 2018 when I started pediatric training. Really enjoyed it, and I think I really enjoyed it because I enjoyed it more because I'd had that year out where I'd had the chance to do something different. That year out, I worked at what was then called NHS Improvement, which was an organisation that was part regulator, part delivery arm. It was an organisation that did things like financial regulation, patient safety. It did a lot of stuff around special measures programs, and actually having the opportunity in that organisation to work on some really big national projects, including the now probably quite infamous 7-day NHS service program that Jeremy Hunt was really passionate about. That taught me a lot about various things, but it also gave me a different mindset and a different perspective on healthcare, which I found really helpful going into my pediatric training. But it also gave me 12 months of something different. So I actually went back in really excited and keen and driven to push through training and to go through those kind of initial hurdles that you tend to have in postgraduate, which is your exams, your competencies, getting yourself geared up for a very different specialty compared to what you're used to in foundation training. So I did that for a few years, and alongside that, try to, where possible, do various things that I could on the side in quality improvement, in research. Spent 4 attempts trying to get a formal academic post. So there was one academic post I really, really wanted in particular in London. And this was the one that allowed you a bit of a freedom to choose whatever research area you wanted. And the reason I really wanted that one is I'd been really interested and keen on the policy research that I'd started doing from my kind of elective in medical school, continued some of that research on through F1, F2, had the opportunity to continue it during pediatrics. And actually at that point, my passion was very much, I want to do policy, but I want to do evidence-based policy. So I really want to be like these other researchers who are spending a lot of time on evidence synthesis, on analyzing national data sets. How do we actually deliver these outcomes in a way that we know is evidence-based? And how do we actually improve things in a way that we've got total assurance that this is the right way to do it? Because I'd seen kind of how policy was developed truly centrally, seen how these things were done in a research setting, felt there was this really nice balance between the two that I'd witnessed in these kind of policy units spin outs of universities, and really wanted to do something in that space. So in addition to my clinical training, spent a lot of time trying to apply for this academic post. And for me, that was the really big lesson of resilience, because it was the 4th attempt that I finally got it, including on my 3rd attempt having an interview that was so bad it ended up becoming a bit of not urban legend, but it genuinely became so bad that other professors around London heard about this interview that had gone so terribly. And when I ran into them afterwards and I tried to go for some mentoring, their eyes would slightly open up, be like, "Oh wow, that was you. Okay, right. Let's talk about how we avoid that in the future." But I think for me, it was really like a reflection of like, you've just got to try again. And then on the 4th time of asking, got the great news that I finally got one of these academic posts. I finally had the freedom to look into something that was quite agnostic, and I actually had the opportunity finally to look at something in the policy space and in the research space. And then COVID happened.
I was going to say, this is it. You've landed it, and we'll talk offline about what this famous fearsome interview was. But anyway, we're back at COVID time, so another scary time. All of us will have our own thoughts and stories and history when COVID arose. So where were you at the time, and what was your journey through that space like?
So in some cases, actually, I was really quite sheltered from a clinical perspective. My first real rotation during that period was in tertiary neonates. We didn't end up getting redeployed. We were very much doing the same things we were doing, different protocol, but none of the kind of redeployment. Very different story. My second rotation, where we were in pediatric intensive care, and towards the end were converted into adult intensive care. From my perspective, actually, though, the biggest change with COVID as a result was what was happening within the wider ecosystem. And you were seeing this transformation overnight of not just healthcare technology, but actually how we were doing technology altogether. So I remember still when we were in 2018 or even before in 2016 doing stuff with the British Medical Association around the various kind of junior doctor disputes, and all the meetings then were always in person. And there was this just big, not just there, but for anything, always this big cultural thing of actually video conferences were very much seen as kind of the second tier level. We now look how we operate. You and I
Yeah.
are on a recording that is done virtually. We would have definitely been doing this in person, I would say, even 5 years ago. So that mindset shift I'm conscious of has changed so dramatically. And I think the biggest thing that for me was in that industry changing, all of a sudden the opportunities that were available to clinicians like myself and to many of us out there also changed overnight. And for me, what was, I think, the biggest kind of significant career change is for various reasons. I ended up being redeployed across the deanery by complete chance. Nothing actually to do with COVID, just kind of an administrative quirk. But I went from a 10-minute commute by foot to a 2-hour commute by public transport, which put a bit of a kind of spanner in the works to this academic job that I've been really, really excited about and was really looking forward to the next 3 years. And I could not work out in my mind how I was going to make that work, like how I was going to make 4 hours of travel a day. And despite all the great intentions by my TPD and various people to help, there was actually doesn't really seem that was anything going to be possible to help me out there. So the only solution I had at that point was I said, well, I think the only thing I can do is going to have to wait till next year for this to get sorted out. In the meantime, I'll go less than full time, and I'm just going to have to find another job to do something to pay the bills to cover this. And with all the changes that had happened during COVID, all of a sudden what I was seeing is actually there was this huge array of companies that were looking to recruit clinicians into the tech space. And there was one that I joined in September 2020. And for me, originally, the idea was to just stay there to understand how do we do tech differently and how do we build good tech? Because when I previously worked in NHS improvements, there was all this talk about how technology was going to transform the NHS, but I wasn't really seeing directly what good looked like. And I think there wasn't really consensus on that. And we also didn't really know how to get to good.
Yeah.
This was a great opportunity for me to try and learn that. And so I went in there fully much with the view of, let's just do this for a year. Let's learn, let's get some very different skills, similar to when I've done policy stuff in the past. And then we'll reassess the situation and go back into kind of a much more traditional training routes. 4 years later, 5 years later, ended up having a very different career path. What was originally going to be 1 year turned into a much longer time because what that company did is they pivoted and they said, actually, given all the opportunities that are out here with COVID, with healthcare transformation, we want to actually develop software as medical device grade technology. And what we need is we need these skills, people who understand the healthcare landscape, people who understand the healthcare systems, people with research expertise. And I was given the opportunity to lead a lot of really exciting clinical transformation, software as medical device development, not just in the UK, but globally. And then for the next few years, had a really, I would say, transformative time working in that industry and combining really what I thought was the best of all worlds. It allowed me to do that transformation that I'd always been passionate about and why I'd always wanted to get into the policy space. It allowed me to do it in a way that was really fast and really agile and really tangible. And it then also combined the research and the rigor and the kind of pragmatic approach to research that I was really, really enjoying from the research policy work that I was doing. And actually, since then, I've not really looked back. My research interests have pivoted very much into the digital health space. My policy work's very much pivoted into what we need to do to support technology and innovation. And I have really got embedded into an industry that I think is going to be genuinely transformative to the way that we do healthcare, in a manner which we've always talked about for years about how do we transform it. But actually now I think finally we have the tools that are going to enable us to do that and to make that change to the way that we're delivering healthcare, not just in this country, but globally.
Yeah, amen to that. It's great. And there's this sort of phrase that I heard from someone once before about, collecting together, doing all these opportunities, chasing all these interesting things, and then they somehow come together into a kind of happy place where you're able to do this, and they described it as, this work is increasing my luck surface area, and the surface area increases, and then you find yourself in this place, which is great. So, but now, so you've seen all this happening in your industry, but now you're at NHS England and doing this work. So, just one final sort of step of this journey to where you are right now. Why choose that way? What was the sort of choose? You were sort of in the industry side. Now you're back in the house, doing this.
So I think, again, this is one of those things where it's that there's always kind of a story behind it, but actually lots of these things happen, I wouldn't say quickly, but because of more contemporaneous circumstances. And it's really about the right fit in that moment and for your development. And I would say kind of, for me, there were three things. One, I've always been interested and passionate about how do we do these things in a way that makes sense for the healthcare system, for providers, for patients, and what's the right way to do that. And I think from a values perspective, that's always going to align with doing work in organizations like NHS England or the NHS more generally. The second thing is, I have had a really fascinating time working with healthcare systems around the world, but actually learning a huge amount of what works and what doesn't work. So working with the NHS, from kind of selling into the NHS, or building products that go into the NHS, running studies with the NHS, but then actually doing that with other healthcare systems. So in the US, in the Middle East, in continental Europe, in other parts of Asia. And for me, there was now an opportunity to take some of that learning and to think about actually what is it that we can do differently in the UK and in the NHS specifically to support a similar degree of transformation that we're starting to see in some other countries around the world. And then the final angle from my perspective is, and I think this is really important for people to consider, there's also just the general thing around like development and trying something new. I'd had an opportunity to do something new when I moved into industry, learning a very rapidly growing and emerging space around software as medical device. I've had the opportunity to be the key or a key architect of some genuine world first devices, certify things in a way that we would have thought 2 or 3 years was completely impossible, lead some projects at a scale that we didn't really think was ever going to be possible, working on research in a number of different domains, or including a number of different types of AI that, for me, wouldn't have even been conceivable 5-6 years ago. And from my perspective, it was a good time to seek out something new and to try something different. And there is a very different challenge and a very different opportunity with working in organizations in the public sector, because what you're really trying to solve is not just a kind of a problem of an immediate product solution, but what you're trying to think about is, how do I solve this problem for the whole range of things that are out there? How do I create pathways and rules and procedures that support the whole modality of things? And how do I balance some of the intrinsic tensions that are going to come around when it comes to innovation, including, for example, how do I make sure we pick and ensure that successful and promising things have the space to grow without also creating a situation where we stifle innovation and we end up pushing forward a very small number of products and services and manufacturers forward? How do I make sure that we create really good value for the system whilst also making this appealing enough for manufacturers and people selling into this? How do I make sure that we're getting really good value and benefits for patients and system as a whole, whilst also ensuring that there's choice and decision making that's at an appropriate local level? Very different challenges, very different problems, very similar to kind of the policy questions I kind of started out my career looking at. And for me, it was really just a chance to look at something from a different angle, but something fundamentally I'm incredibly passionate about, and believe we've got a real opportunity to make an absolute enormous step change in this sector.
Yeah, and here we have Arrash back with the mathematics, the complex equation with multiple parts, seeking to find the solution of this as well. So, and there you are. Great. Well, I suppose that's fantastic. It's so good to hear this and actually sort of hear the other bits. And, if we're saying how to get into health tech, I suppose if a person listening to this, they'd still be like, well, a lot of things happened and then you finally found this job and then you came. And I think it is important to reflect on that, because you do have to be fortunate in some respects, or you have to have an opportunity at some point. But if you were going to speak to people now, if you had like a few nuggets for people who thought that they wanted to work in health tech as a space, and you've illustrated that there's lots of different ways in which you can do it, what would your sort of parting messages be for people to work on?
Yeah, so I totally appreciate the short form of the story sounds very much around, these things kind of happened. I think there's kind of one big reflection that I will give, and then I'll give some kind of lessons from that. But the one reflection I will have is that we see people's successes and their celebrations. What we often don't see is the kind of the training and the gruel that they go in for. We don't see the high number of dead ends that they went into, and nothing really came out of it despite kind of hours and significant investments of work. And I think it's really important to bear in mind that actually for every success that you see from someone, there is probably an order of magnitude of additional effort that didn't really go anywhere, or it's not really obvious what came of it behind the scenes. So the first kind of reflection I would give is it's so important with these things to, where you can, try and keep doors open. And a lot of questions I get asked from sort of early career professionals is, how do I choose between various different options? And I often talk about, often it's helpful to pick the option on the road that for now keeps as many doors open to you as possible, because we just don't know how these things are going to manifest down the line. I did not know that I was going to go into tech, particularly software as medical device, pretty much until it kind of happened. And it wouldn't have happened were it not for some other events that had taken place. And indeed, like the contacts that I'd made early in my clinical career were the ones that helped me move into tech. And some of the contacts that I'd made in tech were similarly the ones that helped me move over back into public sector. So that kind of brings me on to my second reflection, which is I think networking is like incredibly important. And I think we sometimes mistake what we mean by networking. As a student growing up, often there was this idea that the way you had to network was to find and befriend and get very close to and know quite senior people. Actually, from my perspective, and I think it's more important than ever as these industries are changing, having a really good range of peer mentors is probably the single most important thing anyone can do to increase their chances, or to increase their luck, as you kind of put it.
Their luck surface area. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's for two reasons. One, the whole industry is changing. Like what worked for me even 5-6 years ago is not going to be helpful anymore, unfortunately, to people entering into health tech, because it was far less competitive when I was going into it. Now I look at opportunities even at entry level, and you are seeing dozens, if not in some cases hundreds of people applying for every entry level role. And so the game has changed, and there's a higher degree of expectation around what expertise and input you're going to need and what experience you need. So really understanding that landscape from your peers, I would say, is an incredibly important angle here that we've got to take. The other thing also is to bear in mind, these things are going to change really rapidly. Like 5-10 years is going to be a really long time. And those peers are going to be eventually the sorts of people who are going to be really important, and almost in some ways in their industry, really, really game changing. Some of the most impressive people and some of the biggest names that I'm seeing right now in health tech are people that I had done, some of these schemes with in the past, people who were like doing like internships or other things, even sort of 5-10 years ago. And it's amazing to see how far along their careers that they've come. And it's really, I find really nice to see how as a cohort, we've all kind of moved along on that career journey. But that networking also, I think, also makes you realize that who your peers are changes over time, and you have the opportunity to work with people in all different manners of life and on different projects. And I think the ability to work alongside people in as many different scenarios as you can is also another opportunity that I would really encourage people to jump at. So, I mean, like you and I have had a great chance to work on a few projects before, and actually a lot of the work that we've done is introduced me into a lot of the thinking around things like agentic AI in a way that I hadn't really been exposed to in my previous role, and I wouldn't have had that if we hadn't had a chance to connect. And the only reason we had a chance to connect again is through a mutual connection who I'd worked with, you'd worked with, and only by keeping those doors open is there any chance that you're able to kind of seek those opportunities. And the final thing I will say is, again, I know when we present these stories, it sounds like a really nice, cohesive story, or maybe in my case, a bit of a ramble. But that story is often that narrative only exists retrospectively. I don't really know anyone in advance who said, this is what my life is going to be like, this is what my career is going to be like, and it's panned out exactly. And I don't know about yourself, but even I would say 2, 3, 5 years ago, I would not have envisaged where I am now. I'm doing the things I'm always passionate about, but I'm doing them in a way that I never would have thought would have even been on the table. I mean, the technologies that we're working with, we wouldn't even have known on, let alone the kind of ways of working. So those would kind of be my sort of reflections to people. You know, keep the doors open, find a network, particularly your peers. Try to seek out like the variety of things that are out there, and really recognize that actually these things will come, and you only really need one opportunity for that door to open.
Yeah, so that's great advice. And yeah, we're all here kind of creating the future. And if we are creating the future, it's not surprising that exactly how to create it is not going to be laid out in front of you, because you're the ones that's doing it. So brilliant, Arrash. Thank you so much. There's some good stuff in there. There's some questions for another time as well. But thank you for that. And thanks to everyone for listening to this as we hear another story about how to get into health tech. And I'll be back next time speaking to someone new, maybe taking a different route towards this hallowed place. Thank you very much. We'll speak to you next time.
Thanks, Keith.